And welcome back, everybody, to the Luke Deckard Show. I'm your host, Luke Deckard. Tonight, we got a pretty fun show lined up. I've got two really, really fun authors joining me, Stuart Davies and Matthew Booth. Just a quick side note, Bonnie MacBird was meant to be here, but unfortunately she needed to bow out to do some personal things. So we will be missing Bonnie tonight, but we send her our love. So like I said, we've got a fun show. Well, I've got a fun show tonight. I've Stuart Davies, author of The Tangled, Skein, Detective, The Ripper, Legacy, Revenge from the Grave, and other books, and Matthew Booth, who's been on the show many a times. We've discussed, what have we talked about? We've discussed the Universal monster movies. We've talked about Chinatown and hard-boiled noir movies. And he's the author of A Talent for Murder, The Dangers of This Night, and I think I'm forgetting another title, but they can tell us when we get in what titles I've forgotten. So without further ado, I will bring in our guests, and we can kick the night off talking about Sherlock Holmes on film and TV. Welcome, David, and welcome, Matthew.
Good evening, all.
Hello.
So,
good to be back.
Yes, I'm glad to have you back, and it's nice to have you on for the first time, David. Yeah, so this idea was sort of spawned a while ago. I wanted to do a series of shows in June for National Crime Readers, National Crime Readers Month, which is a UK only sort of endeavor. I suppose it will. I don't think it's nothing that's really recognized in the States. I don't think, but it's a fun month in which there's a lot of emphasis pushed towards some of the best crime fiction out there, raising awareness of new stuff. But I thought, hey, for now, we might as well also talk about iconic detectives, which I think is a theme that I could continue into the future. But we're going to kick off with Sherlock Holmes, by far the most famous detective out there. So where do we begin? Let's go with Matthew and David. What was your first encounter with Sherlock Holmes on film or TV? Who's your first Sherlock Holmes?
Well, this is a story well told and often told, but I was at school around about 12 years old, and I encountered the Hound of the Baskervilles on the library shelves, the school library shelf. At the same time, the local TV network was showing the Basil Rathbone films. And the combination of reading The Hound of the Baskervilles and seeing Basil Rathbone, not so much in the Hound of the Baskervilles, but in the Universal series, in the long coat and the trilby hat and everything, that sold me to Sherlockian slavery for the rest of my life. So, in a sense, Basil Rathbone was my first Sherlock Holmes, and he's still very much part of my heart, really. I think Matthew would probably say something similar.
I hope this show isn't going to be David says one thing and I say the same thing almost word for word, but that's the same for me. I was the other way around.
I'm working from behind you, though.
I watched the local, again, the BBC was showing a series of B-movie detective films, things like Charlie Chan, Mr. Moto, and things like that. And one of them they showed was The Scarlet Claw. And I remember saying to my dear old dad, "This is the best one so far." And he said, "Oh, well, these are books as well." And then for that Christmas, I got the complete Sherlock Holmes and read it through, got to the end and read it through again, and sort of repeat to fade for the last 35 years. So again, Basil Rathbone was my first exposure to a Sherlock Holmes film and Sherlock Holmes generally.
Yeah, he seems to be the touchstone for a lot of people. I'm pretty sure I knew of Basil Rathbone before I knew about Jeremy Bratton and some of the others. I seem to remember seeing them on TV when I was a kid, but despite seeing them on TV, I wouldn't say that Basil is my first Sherlock Holmes. Funnily enough, for me, my first sort of encounter with Sherlock Holmes on film and TV that I vividly remember is there was a cartoon series in the late 90s, early 2000s called Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century.
Oh, yeah.
and I don't know. Yeah, and it was a really funny, weird show in which
wasn't Watson a robot in that?
Watson was a robot. So basically,
as he is in many other films.
That's true, as he is in many other films. It was a weird show because you had like Sherlock Holmes had been encased. The premise is that he'd been encased in some sort of honey cocoon since the late Victorian period, and his body is uncovered, and he's brought back to life, and it's all like cybernetic and techno-y London. I think Moriarty has like either traveled in time, or he's like somehow his ghost or whatnot is around, but Lestrade is there, but it's Lestrade's descendant. And then how they created Watson as a robot is Watson. It's not actually Watson himself is back, but the robot Watson reads all of Sherlock Holmes' adventures and then sort of resurrects a form of Watson. And then they because he actually has a robot face, but then they put a Victorian man's face and a bowler on him, and he wears a coat, but underneath this coat it's a big robot body. And if I remember correctly, they did like one season of it, and it didn't go very far, but they did one season, and all of the episodes had some sort of link to one of Conan Doyle's stories. There was some sort of twist on one of Doyle's stories. But it was, my God, it was a weird show for sure.
The idea of Holmes being cryogenically frozen and then
in a honey cocoon.
It's not a new one.
In the 70s, there were a couple of movies like that, weren't there?
Yeah, and there was one in the 90s.
Into modern America, usually. But they weren't very successful either.
There was one in the 90s, and Holmes is played by the same actor who plays the villain in Young Sherlock Holmes, Spielberg's Young Sherlock Holmes. And again, it's not very good.
No.
So this is going to shock people probably, but I've never seen the Spielberg Young Sherlock Holmes movie. I've never cared to see it. What's your take on it?
It's good fun.
Well, the opening is very sweet, although it's not uncanonical. Well, Holmes meets Watson at the public school, which is very nice. But then it goes into fantasy land. It becomes almost a science fiction thing, doesn't it?
I mean, it's good fun if you take it for what it is. But it's very much, sort of Indiana Jones in a deerstalker.
I think this is what happened. I don't know if it's anything to do with the copyright running out in certain parts of the world, but from the 70s onwards, people, producers, directors, writers wanted to do something different with Sherlock Holmes. They didn't want to have him in Baker Street with Watson and the fog and the hansom cabs. They wanted to do something different, so they changed it all. We had, the Gene Wilder film for a start, and I think that's carried on. A desperate need to say there's an essence of Sherlock Holmes, but we're going to do something different. A female Sherlock Holmes we've had now, and all that sort of thing. And I think that's a desperate need to do something with the original material that will surprise the viewer, reader, whatever.
It's an interesting thing that that Holmes just kind of keeps changing and evolving its own. Even if you go back to Basil Rathbone, he has one film that's sort of set in the Victorian period, and then the rest are all contemporary. If I'm not mistaken, two, right?
And then they shoved him into the Second World War, and it is interesting that as the series progressed, the war theme fell away because I think the producers realised that that's not working. We'll have creepy old houses and Gothic sets and so forth. And although it was still set in the 1940s, the 1940s touch was minimal, wasn't it, towards the end? I mean, the Scarlet Claw is really a reworking of the Hound of the Baskervilles.
It's the Hound of the Baskervilles. And they're sort of a bit like the Universal monster movies that we talked about on another show. They end up being in this sort of Never Neverland. This
Fantasy
universal, this universal. It's neither now nor then.
Yes.
So, and that's sort of accounted for. There are cars and there are telephones.
Yeah.
But there's no sense that this is actually the world that people were living in at the time.
No.
It's just this fantasy bubble that Holmes and Watson existed. A sort of hybrid of time and space and things like that. But which I think is to their credit, and I think it works better. It certainly works better than, although I do like the wartime ones, it certainly works better than straightforward propaganda films.
Yeah. It's weird for me because we'll get to BBC Sherlock at some point, but that was a modernization that I didn't mind at the beginning. But there was something.
We all felt that way.
Yes, we'll get there. But there was something. It was strange to me. Some of those early Basil Rathbone modernized movies, especially when he's in the States, and they just felt so. It felt too detached, I think, and I never really liked Nigel Bruce as Watson. I really hated what they did with Watson in that series because it felt like it doomed the character of Watson to forever be known as a bumbling buffoon, which he's anything but. I mean, what's your take on Nigel Bruce?
Can I just say something very quickly before we get on to Nigel Bruce? I think it's interesting point you make there, Luke, about taking into America. That for me is one of the weakest of the series.
I think that's what made them decide to drop the war theme.
To drop it, and I think it's something to do with the further away you go, and this applies to films other than the Rathbone series. The further away you go from the source, the less effective it is.
Yeah, I'm just writing a piece for the Sherlock Magazine about Nigel Bruce, and the interesting thing about Nigel Bruce is, until he came onto the scene as Watson, all the Watsons were also Rands on the cast list. They were way down the bottom. You know Eileen Norwood? Can you name his Watson? No, you can't. What about any other detective?
Arthur Wampler.
Yeah. Can you name? Sorry. You said
Arthur Wampler.
Arthur Wampler. Yes, you can't name really. And the thing is, because Watson in the stories is the observer. He's the one who sits back and describes what's happening and also describes Holmes and all that sort of thing, but says very little about his own feelings and so forth, unless it's very simple things like, I was frightened and so forth. But when they came to do the Bruce things, they thought, we need to do something with Watson to make him significant. What can we do? We'll make him a comic character.
Yeah.
And so they did. And although I think most Sherlockians would say Bruce is a very poor Watson, at least he now made Watson on the same balance on the cast list with Holmes. So it's Basil and Nigel Bruce.
And also, I agree with all that. He did make the character. He thrust the character into the spotlight. And he can only do what the scripts are giving him to do, of course.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But what I think Rathbone and Bruce have is something which I personally think has been lacking for a long time in more modern, and that is, I believe that these two liked each other. I believe that these two were friends. I believe that these two cared for each other. And that
I can't agree more with you there.
Yeah, there seems to be too much emphasis on them being antagonistic towards each other in certain.
I'm with you all the way there, and I think part of that fondness, as you say, comes over on screen. It's because they were fond of each other in real life, and Rathbone said in his autobiography, these films would not have been half as successful if it hadn't been for Willie Bruce, as he calls him, because he was known as Willie, not as for Nigel Bruce. And there is a sort of an avuncular silliness that makes him attractive in one sense, not at all canonical from the Doyle point of view, but they do like each other. Yeah, I agree.
There are certain scenes where Bruce comes close. There's a scene in the Scarlet Claw where is it the Scarlet Claw? There's one where he says, "Well, we won't know without an autopsy what killed him." but I can tell you I think it was this. And
Yeah.
there are few and far between, don't get me wrong. But there are scenes where Bruce has an intelligence, and he's quite sensible in the opening of a few of those entries, up until they decide we need to do something funny now. And that's normally around about 25 minutes in.
Also in Spider-Woman, when he thinks Holmes is dead and he's talking to Lestrade and he's talking about his death, and he was gone. He was gone. It was quite emotional, and it worked. But I think
it does work.
It's always difficult to convince people that when an actor gets a script, is to do the script. So
yes,
if it's going to be silly in this scene, you act silly in this scene, and then you be sensible in the other scene.
I mean, I agree that Bruce is not your. He's not what you instantly think Doyle's Watson is. I get that, but I think there are bits there if you look into it, and also, he made his mark. He made Watson do something, and when he's good, he's very, very good. When he's ridiculous, he's too ridiculous. There's not enough of a balance on it.
Yes.
No. Yeah. I think it's a mistake to say, well, he's not Doyle's Watson, so he's rubbish. I think that's oversimplified.
I think the thing is that writers were using Watson at certain times to pad out the story. I mean, The House of Fear, for example, is about a quarter of an hour section where he's bumbling about the house in the dark because the script has run out of ideas to pad it out for the 65 minutes as it should run. And that's not Bruce's fault.
No.
He's just doing what he's told. But I do agree with Matthew very much. I think more recent presentations of Holmes and Watson, there is too much emphasis on their antagonism towards each other.
I definitely want to get into that with when we talk a bit more about Downey Jr. and Cumberbatch, because that's a real big thing there, which is an interesting bit. But one quick thing in the chat, Marjorie Deck is listening. Hi, Marjorie. Says that both of you guys are making her appreciate Nigel Bruce much more than she has.
That's good. That's good. I'm pleased.
And I think it's also,
I think he gets a bum rap. I really do think.
Yeah,
Bruce gets a bum rap.
It is important to note that it's unfortunate that even his mark on the character is being known as the bumbly, goofy sidekick. While he does have moments where he can shine, but again, all of this is not to knock Nigel Bruce as a person, but it's to say, Universal, you could have done something a little bit better with him than just go with it, because the bumbly thing unfortunately had impact on future Holmes movies and shows, where they kind of lent into that a little bit too much, because they just simplified him down. They simplified that character down to be the bumbly sidekick.
There was an element of that performance in Nigel Stock's Dr. Watson, in both with Wilmer and with Cushing on the BBC series. Stock could be good. Stock could be very good at times, but again, he was responding to the scriptwriter saying, "Let's have a bit of comic moment here," which is, belittles the character.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting to me that with Sherlock Holmes, he's I believe still the most portrayed fictional character of all time, but there's only a handful that I think make it to the top as the most memorable, and not necessarily the most memorable because they are the best, but just for whatever reason they are the most memorable, and that can be because of the current time we're in or whatnot. But it does seem to me that it's almost like every 10, 20 years there is the one Sherlock Holmes that gets added to the film or TV canon, while others who have portrayed him kind of don't really get that recognition for whatever reason. But what is it that I suppose I'm trying to get at is there seems to be a generation's Sherlock Holmes. Why do you think that is?
I just think it's a case of right place, right time. the Holmes of my generation is certainly Jeremy Brett. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I would say still, and I've said this to David loads of times, and anybody who will listen really, that the first 13 Granada episodes are the best we've had. And they are still the best dramatizations of those original stories we've got in terms of production, performance, fidelity, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I
think that Brett came at a time on the back of what Granada could sort of do no wrong because it had done Brideshead Revisited and Jewel in the Crown and all that. And so period dramas were its thing at the time.
Yeah.
And faithful adaptations. But it had been a long time, I think, since there was a Holmes TV series.
Yeah.
I think really the Cushing series, which wasn't particularly great.
The Cushing series. But the thing was about the Granada series as well, that producer Michael Cox was a strong Sherlockian. And he'd been involved in Conan Doyle series earlier, and the main writer had too. And I think they were desperate to bring Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes to the screen, not anything else, not like the later Sherlock series with Cumberbatch. And Brett was on board for that. And so I agree with Matthew in the sense that, he's my Sherlock Holmes of the, of my later years. When people ask me, who's your favorite Sherlock Holmes? I say, well, it's Brett and Rathbone for different reasons. But if I have to, if I'm pushed, Jeremy was an amazing character who brought an amazing character to life on the screen, following exactly the lines drawn by Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, he used to carry around the canon on set and say, I don't think Holmes quite said that, or can we just move that line and so forth? Because he knew the character, and he was obviously friendly with Dame Jean Conan Doyle as well, and wanted to do right by her father's character. And so I don't think we'll see the like again, quite honestly.
I don't think we will either. And just to sort of follow on from that, in a more general sense, it seems to me that the best Holmeses, the ones that really do stand out, are always those actors who have gone back to the books.
Absolutely.
And made dossiers, like Suchet did with Poirot. So Cushing, we know, was a meticulous actor.
Cushing did it, and Ian Richardson did it.
Ian Richardson did it. Brett did it. On the radio, Clive Merrison did it. Always going back to the original and saying, well, is this in the line? Even if we're pushing the envelope a bit, are we pushing it too far? And then there are actors who aren't very good Holmeses or not memorable Holmeses, who just see it as another job and get a script through the post. I don't want to sort of name names, but Robert Powell springs to mind, who is just okay as Holmes. He's not brilliant. He's not awful. Yeah. But you can tell it's just another job for him. Yeah. And I think there's a real difference between those actors who they're the ones that will last. They're the ones that will always turn up on these top 100 portrayals of all time. Yeah. Because they're the ones that have gone back to the originals. And that for me is gold dust.
You've raised an interesting point, and that's about, the going back to the source material is a really important thing in helping versions of this character stand out amongst the others. And I'm just thinking, I mean, we've had in the last 2 or 3 years, I want to say 2 or 3 Sherlock Holmes movies and or TV shows on Netflix, and one of them is being portrayed by Superman, but is it I feel like that particular portrayal doesn't really add anything to it, but I also feel like some of the Enola Holmes movies are such an extreme deviation from Sherlock Holmes, adding a secret sister, or not a secret, but adding a sister he never had, adding a weird backstory with the parents, and sort of and almost sort of turning Holmes into a jackass, and making Mycroft just a flat out villain in that stuff. I remember trying to watch them during, I think it was one of the initial lockdowns, and I just found myself so disinterested because none of it felt like Holmes. And the irony is, I loved Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century
Well,
he was Holmes, and even though Watson was a robot, he was still Watson.
I mean, on the face of it, that goes too far away from the source material.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, in the sense that, the sort of relationships are they're right, and the way Holmes acts is right. So I can get involved or get behind something that is outrageous, as long as the core that it's built around.
Yeah.
It's
a kind of these will do until the right thing comes along, because there was nothing wrong with the Enola Holmes. They were quite entertaining. Same with the Robert Downey Jr. movies. They were good fun. They were like Indiana Jones meets the Deerstalker Man, really. They had the main character had little to do with Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. I remember I interviewed Peter Cushing once. This is a long time before we had any modernized Holmes. And I said, what about Holmes, doing a modern Holmes? And he said, no. He said, you must do Conan Doyle's Holmes. If you have a detective in the 20th century, as it was then, you might as well call him Fred Smith. If it's Sherlock Holmes, he should act like Sherlock Holmes. And unfortunately, Downey Jr. didn't act like Sherlock Holmes. Some of the scenes were absolutely ridiculous.
And nobody wants to see Mycroft naked.
Absolutely.
And Mycroft wouldn't be naked. Mycroft wouldn't be naked.
Yeah.
But what I do think, I think the standout in those films for me is Jude Law's Watson, who seems to be in the wrong films. He needs to be in a film set in period, because he looks great, with a Holmes that complements him.
And exactly, because he's not the general thing is that the middle-aged, the 50-ish Watson. He was quite a sprightly 40-year-old or whatever, with a neat moustache and everything. Ideal looking Watson.
Yes.
He does look like Doyle's Watson, and
he looks like Conan Doyle.
He looks like Conan Doyle, a young Conan Doyle as well. But like early Martin Freeman, and I stress early Martin Freeman, I believe that Jude Law's Watson has seen military action.
Yes.
And I believe he's had his life in danger.
Yes.
But I also believe he has a success rate of women that expands 3 continents. And that's Watson.
Yeah. For fun, I was involved in a discussion at the British Museum about, who's the best Watson. And I just, to be a bit awkward, I chose Martin Freeman. Partly because of the first episode of the Sherlock. Because at that moment where Holmes comes back into the room and said, "Oh, I'm going to see a murder. You're a doctor, aren't you? You've seen some action." He said, "Yes. Would you like to come?" He said, "Oh," something like, I can't remember verbatim, but he says, "Oh, by God, yes." And I thought, that's Watson. That's Watson.
Absolutely. Yes. And there's a scene in the second series, I think. It might be the second series, after Holmes has died, in inverted commas, and Watson's at his grave saying, "Just do one more miracle," and all that.
Yeah.
And at the end of that speech, he stands bolt upright like a soldier, and almost certainly to attention, and then does an about turn like an army man does, and walks away with a march. And I was hugging the screen, saying, "Thank God, this is this is Watson."
I want to go back to Robert Downey Jr. because I don't want to jump too far ahead with certain things. But because the Downey Jr. film, so like I said, 22nd Century was the thing that got me as a kid, and I read some of the stories at that point, but I never got massively hooked. And the funny thing is that it was Robert Downey Jr.'s film that reignited my Holmes passion. So I went to the cinema to see it, ran after I saw it, loved it, went to Waterstones, got the whole collection in one big volume, and went back to my dorm, and since I was doing my undergraduate, and read through the stories and fell in love with Sherlock Holmes and all that kind of stuff. And it was funny watching the movie, the 2009 movie, and then reading the stories, and then picking up all of the subtle references that are scattered throughout the 2009 movie, like whether it's a line of dialogue or little trinkets here and there. And it's funny to me because I feel like I actually don't mind Robert Downey Jr. as Sherlock Holmes. I know people say, oh, he's not tall enough, blah blah blah. I think he can work. I think the biggest problem with those movies is Guy Ritchie. Guy Ritchie wanted Guy Ritchie movie, and I think if they had if there was a different director attached to it, I can't even say who, but let's say it's one of the, what was the guy who did some of the best in BBC Sherlock? It was named like Toby or something like that, or Tobias, I can't remember. But the guy who directed what's the first episode of the series 2? It's completely jumped out of my mind. Scandal in Bohemia. Scandal in Belgravia. If you got one of that director to maybe do these Sherlock, you could have had cool style. I think the writing could have been a little bit tighter with the Downey Jr. movies. But I think the biggest thing was Guy. It was too much Guy Ritchie involved.
Well, he failed. He failed to bring the Man from U.N.C.L.E. to life.
He did.
It could have done so easily.
Again, that's another great example of a film with really, really good actors that could be those characters, underserviced by a weakish script, but I think predominantly a weak director. Because after 2009 Holmes, I don't know. I can't think of any other Guy Ritchie film that has been remotely successful or got a sequel.
No, and I'd agree that he has got a lot to answer for.
Put him on trial.
But I agree about the sort of references to the original, and some of those are not as obvious as the others. I mean, the whole fighting at the in the pit at the back of the pub or whatever it is, the bare knuckle fight. I mean, not necessarily presented in that way, but Holmes does do that.
That was to be fair, that was a cool scene.
Yeah, and Holmes does. At the Sign of 4, he makes it very clear that he beats McMurdo at the,
but he doesn't behave in such an eccentric manner as it, lets the, animals in his makeshift rooms and plants and so forth. But the highlight of the two films for me, good one, was the interview between Moriarty and Holmes when they meet up in the second film. That scene crackles with excitement, and it's like with Brett and his Moriarty. There's two actors thinking, I'm going to top this guy in my performance here. And they're really fighting.
And I think Downey Jr. is probably one of those actors who, when he's up against someone as good as Jared Harris, thinks, I can't just Robert Downey Jr. this.
Yes.
I've got to start acting.
Yes.
And so he ups his game.
I mean, look at Robert Downey Jr. across his Marvel career. He's great in Iron Man 1. He's great in the Avengers. And after that, he's just Robert Downey Jr. everywhere else. But that scene, I agree. That scene between him and Jared Harris, again, Jared Harris, brilliant piece of casting with it. But that film, God, that film was really dumb. It was so frustrating because you've got, Stephen Fry as Mycroft is brilliant. Jared Harris as Moriarty is brilliant. The chap from Peaky Blinders who played Moran, brilliant. Like a brilliant damn cast. Underserviced by a script that has these shining moments. Like the action doesn't bother me. I don't mind Sherlock Holmes having action. I think it's Guy Ritchie who gets in the way, because I have to say the scene in the second movie when they're running through the woods and there are the cannons going off and shooting the guns, like that is a pretty fun scene. It's hard to deny that that's a fun scene.
No, absolutely, and I agree. And there are bits in that second film. Yeah. Where you
come.
This is good. I'm quite enjoying this.
But then you come to the final scene with the wallpaper bit, where he's disguised as a piece of wallpaper.
Come on. This is a very superficial point to make, but I'm going to make it anyway. One of my problems with the first film is that they've got a near perfect Holmes as the villain. And I think to myself, if you just shifted this casting around a bit, Mark Strong
You know what?
Would have
Hang
been
on.
fabulous.
It's funny you say that. And returning to the chat real quick. Biffer's in the chat. Hi, Biffer. How's it going? Thanks for tuning in. Marjorie says, agreeing again with you guys. I decided long ago that I could forgive the Robert Downey Jr. films almost anything because of Jude Law's portrayal of Watson. So yep, Jude Law's great. But this is the one I want to turn to. London Shire Films. Angela Elliott says, I was briefly involved with the Sherlock many years ago in development by someone who had been close to Brett, and they had tentatively cast Mark Strong as Sherlock. How would that have sat with you guys? I mean, I think we got your answer.
I think it would have sat very well, and very nicely indeed. Thanks very much.
I was watching on television on a DVD the other night an early episode of Prime Suspect, and there was a young Mark Strong, and he was brilliant. And I said, "Oh." Yes. I didn't recognize him initially, and I said, "Oh, that he would have been a good Sherlock." Oh, he's Mark Strong. He's got everything. He's got the
he has. And when you see him and Downey Jr. together, it's very difficult not to mourn that lost opportunity.
We've been in this scenario before with, for example, the BBC Hand of the Baskervilles, where I've forgotten his name now. Richard E. Grant was the villain when he could have much been better as Sherlock Holmes in that particular episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Richard episode.
Yeah. So Richard E. Grant played Mycroft in A Case of Evil, which is a much underrated Holmes movie.
That's very underrated. Yeah, very underrated film, and it's like the origin of Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, it is.
It's extremely good. It's extremely good.
What do you think of this? This is I think something modern Holmes that is fallen foul to a little bit, and it was picked up in the Jeremy Brett series. But it's Holmes's drug addiction, and how far should that be taken or not? And I'm just going to pull up an image from it was this was from one of the Irregulars TV show. I don't know if either of you watched the Irregulars show on Netflix. It was the cinematic equivalent of dog poop, in my opinion.
But I mean, no.
So here we go. We have Holmes, and the whole point of this show was that the Irregulars, Holmes is out of action because he is descended entirely into his drug addiction, and this homely, sad-looking Holmes is literally what you get for the whole series. And I sort of wonder, there is a habit in recent years to want to deconstruct our heroes. You see it with Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. We saw it with Superman in Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. This, I think, is another perfect example of the hero Sherlock Holmes being wasted by his drug addiction, so that someone else can step in and be the better hero than the hero of the story. And so my question is, how do you guys feel about these kind of portrayals of Holmes, where he is this sad sack of bones who just can't stop injecting needles?
I think this has been done before and better in the 7% Solution.
Yes.
And I think that's really all.
But that's a good example.
New. It's nothing new. But a lot of the time, they get this drug thing wrong. Going back to the Richard E. Grant Hand of the Baskervilles, Holmes takes cocaine and all the rest when he's bored. The Sherlock Holmes in that adaptation shoots up in Exeter train station toilets before he's about to go on the moor and fight a spectral dog. Yeah, I don't think he needs any additional sort of excitement, to be perfectly frank.
And one of the key aspects of Holmes is his neatness. I mean, Watson says when he's on the moor, he was managed to keep himself with clean collars and very neat. Not like this guy here. This guy here looks like a drug addict, what you will see on the streets of any major city now. Yes. And that would not be Holmes. No. If he's like that, how on earth can he profess to be any kind of acute detective? No.
Well, even you mentioned
the real tragedy is that when he doesn't look like that, when he's cleaned up, he actually wouldn't have been bad at all. If he when he's got there's a photo of him with his hair slicked back, and he's clean shaven, and he's quite persuasive, you know.
But
And I think,
Why is he wearing an earring?
well, who knows?
Oh, actually, Brett used to wear an earring offset. But I agree with Luke in the sense that there is this tendency now to deconstruct our heroes. We've gone so far with them, and we want to just have hidden secrets or hidden weaknesses within them.
Yeah.
And I mean, they did that a lot in the Cumberbatch series. I mean, the Bachelor Night with Holmes and Watson was, you know, another insight into that sort of silliness, wasn't it? Where
Yes.
they got drunk and were playing games and things, which
Yeah.
the real Holmes. Here we go. The real Holmes and Watson, inverted commas, would never have done.
Yeah.
I watched that, and I mean, I think I'm right in saying that Watson was a homosexual in that series.
I can't remember. I can't remember. Maybe, possibly. Can't remember.
Mind you, I mean, there was so much fan fiction with Cumberbatch and with pictures coming on the internet of it. They're in bed together and kissing each other and so forth.
Yes.
Because there is that. I think most people like the fact that Holmes and Watson are a strong bond of friendship, which is really, you know, that Matthew will know the story I'm going to say, the Three Garadebs, where Watson is wounded. And Holmes says, "For God's sake, Watson, say you're not hurt. You say you're not hurt." And then he talks about the great heart. Watson talks about Holmes's great heart. There is that wonderful bond between them. It's not an emotional homosexual bond, but it's a strong manly bond, if you like. Excuse me. I have a cold.
It's all right. It's all right.
That certainly exists. That bond,
Yep.
and it's a very Victorian attribute. It's a very Victorian attitude that your closest male friend was your soulmate, essentially.
Yeah.
More so than your wife would be. And I think that, you know, that's what Holmes and Watson are. But again, I've no problem with, you know, if you want your Holmes and Watson to be a gay couple, I mean, that's been done before. So what sort of thing? I think Holmes is one of those characters like Batman who can sort of be anything you want him to be.
Yeah.
But there is a core center, a core set of values and attributes that they must always have. The rest of it is sort of window dressing on.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's what we all. I think that's what we all want from our heroes anyway, and I think that's why Sherlock Holmes in particular just continues to transcend and be so kind of malleable and work with almost any time period because he is someone that as a hero he's not this sort of aspirational hero. He is more of the he's a cathartic hero where he's, he does have his vices and they're there and you have to deal with them. But you can see somehow yourself. You can relate to him, to his quest for knowledge, his quest for the truth, his quest for exposing criminality and kind of ridding that. There's definitely those core things, and then other stuff can be teased and toyed with and changed around in different iterations, like the like I said, I've not seen it, but I know a lot of people love the young Sherlock Holmes, the movie with
and Mr. Holmes, the Ian McKellen film is another one. But this is going back a bit to what when the opening question sort of who's your favorite? David said it. People ask who's your favorite Holmes. I think that's almost impossible to answer because
in some ways
they all take. Holmes is such a it's such a complex literary character.
Yeah.
So the best Holmes is a little bit of Cushing, a dash of Brett, something of Rathbone, all mixed into one. Because they all do something that is,
I'm gonna interrupt you, Matthew, because you're Matthew, if you can hear me, your internet has sort of crapped out for the time being. So maybe restart the dongle, because you totally frozen on us, buddy. You totally frozen on us.
Just to pick up where Matthew sorts himself out. I mean, the thing is that they are linked together, though. You've got it's Holmes and Watson. You never really want to see Holmes without Watson, or the other way around.
No, absolutely not.
And they are a duo. I mean, I suppose there are many other duos in the world, but really,
well, yeah, it's fascinating, because I mean, you go back through myths and legends, and there's always duo pairings. I mean, even in the Bible, you have David and Jonathan. Like that's a very famous duo from religious texts and things like that. But then modern day stuff, you do have your Batman and your Robin, and so it's normal. It's good to have people. I think people don't want to see people in isolation. I'm a big fan of the hard-boiled detective, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, that kind of stuff. And the thing is, with those early works, Philip Marlowe is desperate for a friend. I mean, The Long Goodbye is all about him being desperate for a friend like a Watson.
Well, he takes over, if you like. He is Holmes and Watson, isn't he?
He is.
Because he's telling the story himself.
Yes.
And therefore he can confide to some extent to the reader his inner thoughts. Whereas with Watson, he's confiding what he thinks Holmes is thinking and his own inner thoughts.
Yes.
So he colours the whole thing in a rich source, if you like. In that way. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Matthew will come back at some point, but I think he's toying with his stuff. So let's jump to a couple of questions in the chat while we wait. Mark Jones, howdy Mark, asks who would the guys cast? Who would we cast as Holmes and Watson in a period version today? That is a hard question. I'll let you take that first, David.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know. You see, the thing is, you would want an actor who was about 40, I think. Both of them for about 40-ish, and I don't know enough actors now who looks like that. I mean, I think still Mark Strong could probably get away with it.
I think so.
Hello,
Matthew's back.
Sorry about that, chaps.
Sorry, buddy.
I'd like to ask Mark that, because Mark's a friend of ours. So,
can I answer Mark before he?
Yeah, answer. Yeah, definitely.
I am absolutely adamant that Richard Armitage and Sam West should be Holmes and Watson.
Sure.
Well, you see, I think Richard Armitage is too old now. I agree with he's got the right look and everything, but I think he's too old. If you're wanting, to start them off, and who was your Watson? Sorry,
Samuel
Sam
West.
Yeah, but he's tied up with all fools and horses.
Well, he's tied up with all creatures great and small.
Oh God, Sam West. I gotta make sure I'm thinking of the right guy before I say what I was about to say. He's I always think of Samuel West as Prince Caspian, because he played Prince Caspian in the BBC Narnia adaptation, and so when I was a kid, that was my first exposure to him, and ever since then, anytime I see him, I'm like, oh, it's Prince Caspian, and I just remember him in that scene where he's wearing this gaudy gold armor as he's walking through through one of these villages. I think it's in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So every time I see him, I'm just like, it's Prince Caspian. So I don't know. I might struggle to see him as Watson.
You could get over that, Luke.
I think in many ways it might be useful to cast out for Holmes, because always the problem is, if you pick an actor who's been known for other things, people, as he comes into Baker Street rooms with a deerstalker on, say, oh, wasn't he in Coronation Street where the fire were in the pub? Or wasn't he in that episode or whatever? So a fresh face.
I was going to say the same thing. I think casting an unknown or relatively unknown person for potentially both use your star power maybe elsewhere in the movie as like a supporting person, but let this be someone that Holmes and Watson could easily be a wonderful breakout role for someone.
Matthew, if you can remember,
done right.
if you can remember,
and I would also say, and I think David will agree with this, that I would like to see, set in period, I'd like to go back to being in period, but I would very much like to see adaptations of perhaps lesser known stories, but also new stories.
Yeah,
I
sure.
agree.
I don't necessarily need to see another version of the Speckled Band or the Red-Headed League.
Yeah, well, as you said, I would agree with you entirely. I think we don't want to do those again. They've been done. They've been done ad nauseum, really. I mean, Cushing did a lot of them. Brett did most of them, and they've been done on radio and so forth. Actually, Holmes that I've always liked, who we haven't mentioned, and it's not on film, is Carlton Hobbs on radio. He was another of my sort of childhood Holmes, because I always thought he had a very strange, eerie voice, which suited to me the image of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, he had a kind of Nigel Bruce's Watson in Normanshire. Oh, Holmes, I'm just on the commode at the moment, but I'll be with you in a moment.
Somebody described him as having a chocolate box of a voice.
That's me. Oh, no, I said he had a Christmas pudding of a voice, but it's
oh, right. I didn't realise I was quoting yourself back at you.
Just a couple of things. Just a couple of things in the chat. Angela Elliott says, "What modern renditions miss regarding Holmes and the drug stuff is the context of drug taking within society that existed in the 19th and early 20th century, where these drugs and particularly opium were normal part of life." It's true.
This is absolutely right. That is absolutely.
Right. The book I wrote for my PhD, the detective I have, he's not a druggie, but he is self-prescribing himself by taking an infant, a child's soothing serum that had like cocaine in it, and it was literally deemed at one point a baby killer because parents were over prescribing their kids, and their infants would end up dying because strong drugs were readily available at the pharmacy.
Well, I'm doing. I'm just going off tangent a bit here, but I'm doing a thing on Tuesday at a library in Cumbria about poisons.
Yeah,
and poisons in the Golden Age, particularly. And one of the points I make is that you could just walk into the chemist and get this. I mean, a plot point in Dorothy L. Sayers' Strong Poison is exactly
the address. Look, I think the thing is with Holmes's drug taking, I think there's been too much emphasis on this. It's hardly mentioned, in the story. It's mainly, particularly in the opening of The Silent Fall. And I've always maintained that The Silent Fall was written after he'd met Oscar Wilde. And I'm not saying Oscar Wilde was a drug addict, but I think he was so impressed with the sort of wildness of Wilde and the sort of effervescence of his character and the natural intellectual element of his nature, that he wanted to inject some of that, to coin the phrase, inject some of that into the character of Sherlock Holmes, possibly, to make him more flamboyant than he had been in the first story. And what did he do? Well, he was a medical man, Doyle, and so he thought, well, I'll give him a drug addict. And then there is that sort of interesting conversation between Holmes and Watson at the beginning of the story, where Watson is inspired by having drunk a bottle of bone with his lunch to challenge Fred. Well, what are you injecting yourself for, mate? So I think it's hardly ever mentioned, although you probably know that Brett had this idea to show the audience that drug taking was bad, and it was in the Devil's Foot, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Where he
buries a syringe,
buries it in the sand.
File and buries it in the sands and so forth.
Ian Richardson says something interesting about the drug use, which is that he says he thought it was an important part and he wanted to show it, but the American producers wouldn't let him. And he says it's so important because it is a chink in the armor of what is otherwise, I think he says, a computer of a man.
Yeah.
And I think it's right that. I mean, Mark said in the chat there about Holmes's frailties. That's the biggest one. You know, it humanizes him.
You could say it's his only one.
But it hardly features in any other story. But I agree with Mark about the ACT struggle with the plots.
Yes.
Some of the stories don't have plots at all, and some of them peter out. That's the awful thing. You know, I mean, the Greek interpreter peters out.
Yeah. And I think Mark raises a good point in that is nowadays, like, I mean, it was in the Robert Downey films, it was the whole crux of CBS's Elementary. It overtook BBC Sherlock. It's been in the regulars. It's modern writing. Writers are looking for this big vice that they can hang all this dramatic tension on. And because Doyle has these few scattering mentions throughout his stories. I mean, Angela Elliott mentions that it's also mentioned his drug taking is in the Scandal in Bohemia. You know, there's passing references with one kind of the big scene in Sign of Four where he's doing the drugs and stuff. And it's easier to manufacture the drama and have that be the big thing than to really sit and come up with a lot of plots. And I agree. There are 60 some odd stories of Sherlock Holmes written by Doyle. There are a bunch of them that get weak pretty quickly into the story. But I'll give him a pass. It's what I don't like is I think modern interpretations of the character leaning so heavily on the drugs. I feel like that is a crutch for them to not have to worry about developing drama elsewhere in the story when they can just lean on Holmes is off his face.
Absolutely.
Well, as Matthew said in the BBC Hound of the Baskervilles, where Holmes goes into the station toilet to take some drugs, it's totally inappropriate because as you mentioned earlier, Matthew, he doesn't do it when he's on a case. It's only when he's got hours of boredom when nothing is challenging his intellect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a hello from Paris, France. Thanks for joining us, buddy. And let's see, Angela says, regarding casting, Sean Evans, but perhaps Endeavor would preclude him. Sean, he's Endeavor to me now. Sean Evans will forever be Inspector Morse. So I can't see him as Holmes, but he is wonderful.
Neither can I. And yet we're still forced to see Mark Warren as Vanderbilt because I can't take that either.
Matthew, you're getting a bit okay. He's restarting. Mark Jones mentions unknowns would be great. Feeling that he'd go with Harry Lloyd from Brave New World or Wolf Hall as Holmes, and I'm gonna butcher this name, but Chiwetel Ejiofor from 12 Years a Slave as Watson. Yeah, that could work. I'm assuming in a modern context. The tricky thing you have to, I think, is with period stuff is if you are going to do something as sensitive as swap races or even potentially genders in a period piece, I think that then becomes something that you really need to acknowledge and explore that drama. That's something that, unlike the drug stuff that is boring, because I remember, what was it, in a couple Christmases ago, there was a Dickens film where they did a bunch of swapping around, and it was just sort of glossed over. People weren't acknowledging that people were different genders or races, and I was like, well, this would, at this point in time in 1800s London, there would be a lot of racism. There'd be a lot of problems that this particular couple would be.
I think you had that in Great Expectations also. which has
Yes.
just been on recently, and Christmas Carol was the one you
Christmas Carol, that was it. Yeah, they did Christmas Carol, and I thought, I thought it was wonderful casting. But I thought, why are we? I don't think we should be ignorant to these changes. We need to sort of, address them. Or if it's a modern film, then you really don't need to. But if we're talking period, then you could do it. But you need to be honest about what your what life was like at that time.
I agree. Yeah.
And how you move on with that. Yeah. Okay. So what was your guys' take on Elementary? We can chat a bit more about Elementary and Sherlock, and then we can kind of wrap up. Did Elementary land for you? I mean, I remember when they first announced it. I was like, oh, they're like, oh, Holmes is going to go to America and get treated for his drug addiction, and instantly, as the premise, my whole body just sank. I was like, ah. Really?
I think the thing that one good thing about it was it wrapped up a mystery in 50 minutes. So it was
classic American TV, indeed.
Like the old-fashioned American TV series. But they were playing about with everything so wildly that I just lost interest. Really,
yeah. I about a year ago or so.
It was a prime.
There we go. I was going to say about a year ago or so, I started to rewatch some of it because it's all on Paramount Plus. And when I removed the idea that this was Sherlock Holmes entirely, took that out of my brain, I was like, these plots are fun little 45-minute little mysteries that generally work. Not all of the acting, I think, is up to scratch, but on a whole, it was mildly entertaining. And I have to admit, I really like Johnny Lee Miller in the idea of him being Holmes. I don't think he's Sherlock Holmes in Elementary, but I think he's another actor who was great, but underserviced by a stupid interpretation of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, but I agree with you. The mysteries were clever and sharp. Yeah.
Yeah, many of them were. I don't know, Matthew. I think you might be frozen again, buddy. If anyone in your house is using the internet, Matthew, tell them to turn it off. Get off the phones, because I think that might be what's slowing you down. I agree that there were some really clever mysteries in Elementary, and I like the guy who played Gregson, and I like Detective Bell, and I liked Miller as this Holmes sort of character. But yeah, it was a shame that it just. I feel like it was they were banking on the name Sherlock Holmes, and just when they really should have just done a new detective show.
Well, indeed. I mean, you think in one sense, at least they researched the books, the genre, to bring in all the characters, including Moriarty and so forth. But then they just went wild with it, and and they were actually blotting out the mysteries to some extent.
Yes. Yeah.
But
and then,
hello, Matthew. Are you?
He's slowly moving. I'm not sure if he's back fully.
Yeah.
I don't know if he can hear us. But if you can, again, Matthew, tell everyone in the house to stop using the internet.
I don't know whether it would be possible now, particularly as the Brett series is still shown on various channels in this country.
Yes.
But to me, the joy would be if we could get a new Sherlock Holmes series with some new, carefully constructed plots, set in period, with two people who could actually capture the nature of the original characters.
I would love that,
and I think that would go down a bomb, really.
I think it would, absolutely.
But we just need someone out there with money and talent and whatever,
and sway. Yeah, I mean, because if you think about it, I'm a big fan of shows like Ripper Street and Peaky Blinders, and it's obvious that a stellar period drama can be created. That whether it's the BBC or Netflix or Amazon, that ability is absolutely there to do that. And it's actually quite surprising that all of these new iterations, you know, the Enola Holmes, the Irregulars, and stuff like that, that no one has actually thought, oh, let's just do a really stellar Sherlock Holmes show.
Yeah.
In the vein of Brett, in that it's, you know, it's going to be as classic as possible with your, you know, hour 15, you know, minute, you know, episodes that, you know, it's shocking to me. But at the same time, I think if Netflix did it, they would cancel it after a season, because that seems to be their MO. Netflix likes to cancel everything after about one season.
Right.
I guess we can just wrap up with a little bit of BBC Sherlock, because that was something that took the world by storm, and I think that really is the last great Sherlock Holmes on TV that started great and then got complicated.
I was at the Sherlock Holmes Society of London annual dinner.
Yeah.
All those years ago. I can't remember particularly which year, something like 2007. And Mark Gatiss was one of the guests there.
Oh, yes.
I'd met Mark before, and we were having a chat after the meal. And he said, "Oh, you'll be surprised to know I'm doing a Sherlock Holmes series." I said, "Oh, how exciting!" He said, "But it's Sherlock Holmes now, in the modern day."
Yes.
And I said, "In the modern day, how could that work?" I said, "You'll have Sherlock Holmes on Dartmoor, and the hound is coming towards him, and he'll reach into his pocket, pick out a phone and say, 'Send me back up.'" And, and he said, "You wait and see." And I did wait and see. And I thought that the initial series, the first few episodes, were absolutely brilliant, because it was a wonderful, interesting take. And then what happened? They just lost the plot, or increased the plot, and just added on, you know, Mary Mawson as a spy, and his parents, and all that. And that episode where we were all fooled, where they went back into Victorian dress, and then it was sort of a dream, or in the Mind Palace, and it was just, and then the last episode was just crazy, and
the
it had
Secret Sister was ridiculous.
And I just thought they'd really lost the plot, and I suspect there will be no more, because the two actors are so successful and popular in other fields now that getting them all together.
I'd say we'll see, because I mean, I know they've got some connections to Marvel, but I'm trying to think. I couldn't tell you what either Cumberbatch or Freeman have done outside of Marvel in the last few years. I feel like they are Holmes and Watson, and maybe they don't want to be known for those characters, hence why they're not coming back and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, look, this is what people like. I would say lean into it, but maybe they don't want to. But I agree. I was very skeptical when BBC first came out, but the study in pink won me over straight away. It was so sharp. It was a wonderful blend of bringing of adapting a study in Scarlet, while also modernizing the character in fun ways, while also having humor that worked better than I would say Nigel Bruce's humor worked.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know, and you know, I think they played with in that early season.
Well, it was witty humor rather than bumbling humor.
Yes. And I think also in the first season, they handled the idea and the concept of Holmes's drug addiction way better. It wasn't heavy-handed. It was sort of sprinkled in. It goes over the top in later seasons for sure. Especially I think it's at the end of series 3 into the where they're just like, oh, Holmes is high all the time. Like, wait, why is he high all the time? That's not true. Stop it. But what I would love to know, I would love to sit down and have a conversation with Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, because I would like to get to the bottom of what happened with series 3 and 4, because I remember reading an article once that because it's funny to me that Skyfall came out in 2012, the James Bond movie, the big 50th anniversary movie, right?
Yeah.
And then season 3 of Sherlock came out, and I noticed Sherlock Holmes became a spy. And they were, not only did he become a spy, there were shot for shot imitations of scenes that happened in Skyfall and in Spectre that started to show up in series 3 and 4.
Right.
And then I read an article where like some market research apparently dictated that they, make it more Bond-like. And I don't know if that article is true or not, but I would love to chat with these guys and be like, what happened? What did you want versus what did the BBC say you need to do this because market research said so? Like, I mean, what's your take? Do you think that it was those two guys just going crazy with it, or could it be BBC?
I think so. I think also I went on location with them when they were filming. And I met up with Moffat and Mark, and both of them, particularly Moffat, said, "I don't know what I'm doing with this. I'm writing Doctor Who at the same time." So I suspect they were just, let's do this, and they weren't really thinking, as they were right at the beginning of all this, because apparently they were thinking up plots for the original series when they were traveling down on the train to Cardiff to do things on Doctor Who, and I think they just said, "Oh, let's fly with this, let's do this." And I didn't know about the copycat Bond things, but I must look at those again. But I to be honest, it's interesting. I can watch the Brett series over and over. I can watch all the Rathbones, but I can't watch more than the first two series of the.
Same. I'm the same. It is a shame because I will happily, during the pandemic we watched the whole thing all the way through, and I was so in love with series 1 and 2, and then everything just crashed, and it brought me back to that period when I remember seeing the premiere of the empty hearse, or whatever the episode was called. It's the first episode of series 3 where they bring Holmes back to life in a way that told me they've run out of ideas. The fact that the explanation for his survival was, we're not going to tell you, was, in my opinion, it was cheap. It felt like, no, just write, even if it's a little implausible, write something that we can like believe in some way.
And what is so surprising in all this, because I know Mark Gatiss, and we had when I went on the shoot, it was an overnight shoot, and so we had about an hour break, and I sat with him in the little Winnebago with a coffee and chatted, and I know he is an avid Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes fan, and
he is absolutely.
He's moved so far away from any of that concept, but for God knows what reason. Because he's had a career in following his childhood delights, such as M.R. James and so on and so forth. And apparently he's doing something with Quatermass now. And well.
Yes. And Matthew Booth is back just as we need to wrap
I am
up.
so sorry, gentlemen.
Anything for a drink, anything for a pint, eh?
The hamster gave up.
It's all right, buddy. We're glad to have you back. We were just kind of capping off a conversation on BBC and what we liked and didn't like. I don't know what.
I think
what are your?
It's fair to say that Matthew and I agree about the BBC.
I think the first two series were absolutely superb.
Yeah.
I think after that it just fell to pieces very, very quickly.
Well, I mean, David, if you know Mark, throw him an email, say, hey, come on the show and we'll discuss it so that everyone can know what the fuck happened.
I will do that.
I mean, he'll say no, but by all means, ask him.
He suddenly stopped replying to my emails, but he was very kind to me early. Very, very kind indeed. But he's such an amazing man, really, and such a busy man, acting, writing, and producing, and so forth.
Yeah. I think I'm going to follow my gut, and I really want to say that it was more BBC, head of BBC intervention saying, go this route because market research is telling us to. Only because there were really strange shifts in both Sherlock and Doctor Who at the same time that didn't seem to match what these guys were doing previously.
Yeah.
And I think it's no coincidence that Russell T Davies is back running Doctor Who, kind of course correcting everything.
That pleases my wife no end.
It what?
That pleases my wife no end.
Yes.
She's the Who fan in our house.
Yes. No, it's I'm very pleased. I was at the writers there was a writers strike in the States, obviously, but last Wednesday the Writers Guild of Great Britain had a solidarity protest in Leicester Square, and he was there. I was like, hey, there's Russell T Davies over there. That's cool. So that was pretty fun. No, I'm glad that he's back, and I'm very keen to see what he does with Siri with the new season. All right, I think we can kind of wrap up now. I think we've said all we can really say in this hour in a bit.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And
yes. No, thank you both for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Let me be on for half of it.
Well, thank your internet for letting you be on.
The lighting is gone now. I look like the ghost.
It's all right. This one last question or one last comment from Marjorie Deck says, I think the wedding speech by Holmes and BBC was written by someone that loves Watson, in spite of all the BBC derailing. Yeah, some of the speech was definitely pretty cool. There were moments in Series 3 that have like fun moments, but on a whole, it tanked, and Series 4 is unwatchable for me. And Angela Elliott says, thanks, guys. Very interesting. Yep. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in, people. If you haven't, like this video, please, and subscribe to the channel. I'm here every week talking about something pop culture related, whether that's things like Sherlock Holmes or films or TV shows or books, and I got guests on all the time. And if you want, you can deep dive on my channel and probably find really old reviews of Series 3 of Sherlock where I do the Bond comparisons. That's somewhere deep dove in my channel. But David, Matthew, where can people find you outside of this video on social media?
I'm on Twitter as @HolmesBooth.
I'm at Twitter at DS Davis. Yeah.
I'm on Instagram as Matthew Booth Author.
There we go. So go follow these guys.
We both ought to say, go on Amazon and look at our list of publications there too.
Absolutely.
Yes, please do.
Yep.
My latest is called.
So can I just mention? There is a book launch on the 5th of August at the BFI for this book.
There we go, right there.
Jeremy Brett of Sherlock Holmes. Anyone is welcome.
Oh, wonderful. There will be links to your pages on Amazon in the description of this video, so anyone listening can go and jump there to pick up your books and dive into everything you've got. Yeah. Well, until then, we will see you. I'll see you guys some other time, and listeners, I will see you some other time. But enjoy the rest of your week.
Much appreciated.